about 15 minutes about the trees today. Is this your guys' first time coming here? First time Muir Woods?
First time Muir Woods, but many times to the bay.
To the bay?
Yeah.
Where are you guys coming from today?
Arizona.
Arizona, okay. Have you ever seen a redwood tree before? Or?
No.
Pretty impressive, huh?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, my name's Aaron. I grew up right here in Marin County.
Cool.
I've lived here for most of my life. After growing up here, I did go to school about 5 hours north of here in Humboldt County.
Okay.
If you're familiar with that, I don't know if you are, but there's these same trees grow up there.
Yeah.
And if you thought a tree like this was pretty big, if you do go up to Humboldt County, they can get even bigger. The biggest one we have here in Muir Woods is about 260 feet tall. The oldest, like I said, is about 1,000 years old. Those are rough estimates. If you go up north to Humboldt County, there's a lot more rain and fog up there, so these same trees can grow to 380 feet tall, which would be the tallest living tree on Earth. And under the right conditions, as I mentioned, they can live to over 2,000 years old. Does anyone here, for how tall they are, want to take a guess on how deep their roots might go?
Take a guess.
100 feet?
100, see that? Yeah, that's what I would guess too, right? It's actually about 10 feet deep.
10?
Yeah, I think the most they go is about 13. So the reason they're still standing and not just toppling down all around us is they don't go deep, but they do go really wide. Their roots can stretch 50 to 100 feet from the base of the tree. They'll also actually lock roots with the roots of surrounding trees, so they can hold on to each other for support. And in those root connections, they can also exchange water and glucose. Glucose is like a sugary food for trees, basically. So say we have one up here that's not getting enough water. This tree down by the creek has more water than it needs. Through those root connections, they can actually transfer nutrients to each other. So that's why you see them do really well in big groups like this. You plant one on its own, it'll probably live, it'll do okay, but you get a big windstorm or things like drought that stress them out, they're gonna have a lot harder time surviving that. To show you guys one other quick thing that's pretty cool about these trees, I haven't asked you to just close your eyes for a couple of seconds and listen to the sounds of the forest. Alright, and what do we hear? Nothing, right? Maybe some water, some wind, any birds, maybe one or two, not a lot really, right? So you might expect in a forest this size there'd be birds all over the place, but there's a pretty good reason why there's not a ton. The redwood trees are full of this stuff right here called tannic acid, or tannins. I'll pass this around if you want to take a look at it. If that sounds familiar to you though, maybe you drink red wine, coffee, eat dark chocolate, drink tea. Same tannins in those, just like the tannins in those give those foods and drinks a really bitter taste. The tannins in the redwood trees give them a similar bitter taste to the insects that would otherwise burrow in and eat them. So there's a lot less insects in a forest like this. Birds eat insects, so without that food source, there's a lot less birds than you might expect. This tannic acid also gives the redwood trees their characteristic red color. In addition to making it resistant to insects, it makes them resistant to fire, rot, disease. So just to recap what I've said about the trees so far, they're tall, they're straight, they're beautiful, they don't really burn, bugs don't want to eat them, they don't rot, right? Kind of sounds like what you want to build your house out of, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the ideal material. Unfortunately for these trees though, if we go back to the 1800s, there were a lot of people that had the very same idea. These trees used to be a lot more widespread here. But they have been logged pretty extensively, and today there's only about 3 to 5% of the original redwood forest that has never been logged. That does actually include Muir Woods, which is one of the reasons why it's such a special place. But like I said, there's been a lot. There's a couple big events in California that contributed to that. Does anyone know what was found here in 1848?
Gold.
Gold, right? So gold was discovered. All of a sudden, a whole lot of people wanted to be here. They wanted to find gold, get rich. All these people moved here. All of a sudden, thousands of people needed houses to live in. They needed shops. They needed timber for their mines. These trees were very abundant at the time, and they had all those great properties I described. So a lot of the trees were cut down. If we fast forward again to 1906, there was another big event here. Does anyone know what that was?
Fire.
Yep, so there was fire. There was a huge earthquake that struck San Francisco, destroyed a lot of the city, also ignited a lot of fires. About 80% of the city was destroyed overnight. Once again, houses needed to be rebuilt, shops needed to be rebuilt. We're pretty close to San Francisco. There are a lot of these redwoods still around. Most of them were cut down. Muir Woods itself was actually spared though. Anyone want to take a guess why that might be? So there was a couple that owned it, but also, did you guys take that nice little windy road down here today? Could you imagine cutting this tree down, taking that back out with 1906 technology? So it's hard to get down here, hard to get the wood back out.
No easy way down to the ocean.
Not a super easy one, no. The creek doesn't quite get big enough where you could float it. So Muir Woods was passed over for about a year, but then the year after that, there was a water company that set their sights here. They did want to cut down the trees, use them for timber. After that, they were going to build a dam across this canyon, fill it up with water, create a reservoir. That was going to provide water to the city of Sausalito. But like you said, someone had purchased the land. The water company did not own it. It was owned by a couple named William and Elizabeth Kent. They had purchased the land in order to protect these trees. But the water company's plan was to seize it from them under eminent domain, where private property can be seized for the public good. Under eminent domain, there's really not a lot that the Kents could do to stop that. So they were pretty creative with their solution. They went to the US federal government. They offered to donate the land on the condition that this be turned into a national monument. The president at the time was Teddy Roosevelt, and he used the newly established Antiquities Act, which allows a president to declare a plot of land a national monument. It does not require congressional approval. So he was on board with that, so they donated the land. He declared it a national monument, and Muir Woods was saved, which is why you're all able to enjoy this today. So now that you know a brief history of the woods, a couple of facts about the trees, we're going to talk for a minute about another inhabitant here that you may or may not actually know exists here. Does anyone here know there were fish in Muir Woods? Okay. Pretty common. Not a lot of people do. They come here for the trees. So we have a couple kinds of fish here in Muir Woods. We have a little fish called a sculpin that hangs out on the bottom of the creek. We also have steelhead trout, and then we have the fish we're going to talk about today, which is the coho salmon. And if any of you guys have been here in the summertime, the creek gets a lot lower than this. You really wouldn't believe there's fish in here, but we actually have these coho salmon in the creek year round. During the summer when the water's low, it's just the little ones that hatched the previous winter. They are born late winter, early spring. They stay for 1 year, maybe a year and a half. Then they swim downstream out to Muir Beach, where they get out to the Pacific Ocean. Once they're there, there's a lot more food available than in this tiny creek, so that lets them grow to a couple feet long. They'll spend another year and a half or so in the ocean, and then they will swim back to Muir Beach, right back up this creek. They almost always return to the same creek they were born in. They'll swim up to places like right here. The female will use her tail to dig out a hole in the gravel. She'll lay their eggs, the male will fertilize them, and she'll cover them back up. Pretty soon after that, the salmon will die, but then the eggs will hatch, and the circle will repeat itself. Those steelhead trout that I mentioned have a very similar life cycle, with the exception that once they spawn, they can actually just head back to the ocean, feed for another year, come back and do it again. You guys may be wondering though why we're talking about fish at a tree talk. None of you knew there were fish here. I'm guessing you all came to see these beautiful trees. But does anyone here think they might benefit from salmon in their daily lives? Anybody like to fish for salmon? How about anyone like to eat them? Always get a couple of people with that one, right? So smoked salmon, sushi, all delicious. Those are some ways that we benefit really directly from salmon. But there's another way that we benefit, particularly here in the woods. Does anyone remember what I said happened to them after they spawn?
They die and they turn the foot away.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly it. So they come back here, they die, but when they swam upstream to get here, they were bringing all those nutrients they gathered in the ocean while they were feeding. They swim those nutrients upstream into the creek, they die, those nutrients spread out into the creek and even into the surrounding forest.